This conference will now be recorded.
And you're on.
Okay, so this video is about comprehension strategies before reading, during reading, and after reading. So to begin with, we want to know what exactly is comprehension. What does comprehension mean? Comprehension is simply just understanding what you read so that you read it and you get what it's telling you. So making meaning while you're reading, thinking about what you're reading while you're reading, and asking questions while you're reading. What this PowerPoint is going to tell you is that as the person who's reading, you kind of have a job to do while reading. So if comprehension is just understanding, making meaning while you read, then what are comprehension strategies? And the strategies are the tools you use when you're trying to make sense of what you're reading. So you want to think of it as your toolbox. And we're going to think about it in terms of what we do before reading, during reading, and after reading. So let's begin by thinking about a car mechanic. So a car mechanic first needs to know some basic things. What kind of a car do they have? They need to know what's wrong with the car. What do they need to do with the car? Next, the mechanic needs to start fixing the car, and they need to have a plan of if I have to fix it, this is what I need to do to fix it. And the mechanic needs the right tools for the job. When the job is done, the mechanic needs to review or check the work. So we're going to use that when we're thinking about what we're doing in comprehension. Like the mechanic, the reader needs to first know something about what he or she is about to read. Like the mechanic, the reader then next needs to do the job, read, and then, like the mechanic, the reader needs to look back at what was done when they are finished reading. So this is where the before, during, and after reading strategies come in. So going back to that mechanic, first a mechanic needs to know what kind of car they have. They need to know what they have to do with the car. So, and I made these green because we're about to go. So before reading, an important before reading strategy is having a purpose for reading. And this can be as simple as, my purpose for reading this is I have to answer questions when I'm done. My purpose is I'm practicing with all these different reading packets that they keep giving me because I'm eventually going to take the GED. I'm getting information about a time in history, or I'm reading an explanation about a scientific process. So my purpose is to learn something about this time in history, or to understand what this process, the scientific process is. Or I'm reading a story, so my purpose is going to be to get and know the beginning, middle, and end of the story. So before you read, you need to have a purpose for why you are reading. The second, another important before reading strategy is stopping to think what it will be about. So before I read, I want to think, what is this going to be about? So I might read the title, if there is a title, and then make a guess what it'll be about. The title of this is The War of 1812. So I'm going to guess that it's going to give me information about who was involved in that war, who won that war. What do you know about this topic? Make a connection. So if it was, like I said, the War of 1812, I would say, well, I don't know very much about the War of 1812, but I know some things about war. And even if it's just that, now I've made a connection. I'm starting to think about things about a war. And I know the time that it happened, so I might be able to think about the kinds of weapons that they were using in that war. That's just an example of making a quick connection. I always check to see if I'm about to read. How long is it? How long is the chapter I'm about to read? How long, if it's a packet, how long is this piece? Look at the pictures, look at the maps, the charts, whatever is there, and just start to think about what's that telling me about what I'm about to read. You might even read, if there are questions at the end, you might even read one of the questions at the end. You might read one of the questions that has one of the bold words, or you might read one of the questions that you have to do a written response. And that, by reading that question, it's going to give you a little bit of an idea of what you're about to read. So now we're ready to begin to read. So we need to start having a plan of what we're going to do while reading. And I made the during reading strategies red because important thing about reading that a lot of people don't do is you need to stop. It's important to stop while you're reading and think about what you are reading. And this gives you a chance to self-monitor. And self-monitoring is just paying attention to what's happening. If reading is about understanding, then you need to stop and check, am I understanding what I'm reading? So you read some and you might decide, I'm going to read the first 3 paragraphs, or I'm going to read the first section, and then stop and say, okay, so what was that about? And make sure that I can say what I just read about. What was the point? What's one of the points that they were trying to tell me? Does it make sense? And here's the important thing. If it doesn't make sense, then I need to do something. I need to go back and reread it. And I do that a lot. I go back and reread. I might have to check something. I might have to look a word up. Or sometimes you might need to read on a little further and then stop again and say, okay, now I get what this is about. But stopping during reading is very important to make sure that you are understanding what you are reading. And you need to have the right tools. The mechanic needs the right tools. You need to be using the right strategies. So it's a little bit different with your reading if you are reading fiction books, books that are made up, or nonfiction, which are books that are information that is actual, that is real. So this is just an example of what you might see in fiction and nonfiction. A fiction would be a story. Nonfiction would be one of the passages about social studies or science. So an important during reading strategy for fiction is stopping to think about what's happening in the story. So try to get a picture of what's happening in the story. What happened at the beginning? And so at the beginning, such and such happened. And now in the middle, this is happening. Ask yourself, who are the characters? Who seems important? Where are they? And this will give you the setting. What is the problem? So in any kind of fictional story that we read, there's going to be a problem. There may be more than one. So you want to start asking yourself, what is the problem? And then what do you think is going to happen next? And making guesses while you read is really important. And it's not important that you're right. It's just important that you're making guesses. Okay, so I think next, this is what's going to happen. And think about the clues that the author is giving you so that you're making those guesses. In nonfiction, excuse me, an important strategy is stopping to use the text structures. And these are the things that the author provides for you, like subtitles that are in bold that tell you what the next section is going to be about. Or there might be charts, or there might be illustrations or graphs. It's important. Sometimes we just skip over those things, but it's important during reading to stop and look at what the author has provided to help you understand what is going on. So the picture I have here as an example is about volcanoes, and obviously the print is way too small, but if you were to be reading this, you would want to stop and look at the picture about volcanoes and look at all of the various things that the author has told you about the various parts of a volcano, and something probably about what's happening when it's erupting and how it's erupting, because this is all giving you more information about what you are reading. When you are done reading, when the mechanic is done with his car, he needs to review, maybe have a checklist, and make sure, do a test drive, make sure the car works. Hopefully that's what they're doing with our car. After reading, it's important to do the same kind of thing. So you want to stop and review. And in reading, what we call this is summarizing. So you're going to say, okay, so what was this about? If it's fiction, what was the story about? What happened? What was the problem? How was the problem solved? If you're reading about a time in history, what happened during this time in history? What did happen in the War of 1812? What was a critical battle? What was a turning point? Who won the battle? How long did it last? If it's about a scientific process, if it's about, for example, the volcano, how does a volcano erupt? How do we know that it's going to erupt? What happens when it erupts? So when you're done, how do you know these things, and what's your evidence? So evidence we talk about in reading is, so what exactly did you find out in your reading? If you go back in, because it says right here, I know that this is what happened because it tells me right here, and it's important to go back and use that information right from what you just read. Going back and getting the information is your evidence. So reading comprehension is understanding what you read. And you want to have a toolbox of strategies to help you understand what you read. Before reading, these strategies might be to have a purpose for reading, to connect to the subject. During reading, the strategies might be to stop and question what's going on, and to form a picture in your mind of what's happening. So this is about the War of 1812. I'm picturing the location that they're talking about. Or this is about a volcano and I'm starting to picture what that looks like. Or this is a story and I'm starting to get a picture of what's going on in the story, and even maybe how the main characters are feeling. After reading, you're going to stop and say, okay, so what was that about? What did I get from what I just read? How do I know? How do I know? Because it tells me right here. And that's what your evidence is, what you're getting right back from what you just read. And that's it. That's comprehension, and that's strategies to use. And you got this. Okay.
I think that was really great.
Good. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm going to hit stop recording now, unless
Okay.
there's anything you wanted to add.
Nope.
This conference will now be recorded.
Oop.